Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm currently having a crisis about the fact that the new year is going to be the year that I graduate high school, but I'm fine. The weather today is really bad. It's super windy and rainy, so I apologize for any sort of rustling or raindroppy sounds that might be heard. I got the fabric for this project from a sale that a staging company was having. This project started out as a way for me to practice getting really good finishes on a garment, and I think I mostly achieved that, even if the end project was kind of bulky. I drafted this skirt pattern from a 1918 book called Parisian Ladies Dress Cutting, or something along those lines, from archive.org, and I used a 1922 skirt making for tips on how to attach things like the interior waistband or how to finish the seams. The drafting process itself was really simple. The drafting for the four-gored skirt, which is what I made, included a back panel that had lots of gathering in the back, so I didn't really need to worry about the measurements being incredibly precise. It was a little bit tricky for me to figure out the ratios of what they wanted the measurements to be, since they were only giving measurements for someone with a waist that was a little bit smaller than mine. But using a handy-dandy pocket calculator, which dressmakers in 1918 would not have had, I was able to figure out some of the ratios pretty easily. When I originally finished drafting the pattern, I was a little bit afraid that I wouldn't have enough fabric to actually make the skirt, but I was able to cut out all the gores with some extra fabric left over for pockets and a belt by sacrificing some of the length. The wool was thick, but it was also pretty rough to the touch, so I decided to flatline it using this lightweight blue fabric that I had in my stash. I don't really know what it is because it was used as a background in a video that my French teacher filmed, but I didn't feel comfortable using the medium weight cotton I had because I was worried that too much fabric would make the skirt too stiff. Once I had basted the two layers of fabric together, I bound the edges of all the gores with bias tape, which, although led to a little bit of insecurity about the seam allowances, did finish my edges pretty nicely and pretty early on. I think my main problem was that my bias tape was a little too wide, so next time I do this I'm going to use 1/2 inch wide bias tape instead of 1 inch. Once I had bound the edges, I made a fancy little pocket insert following the instructions of a 1922 dressmaking book. I put the pocket on the side gore, which turned out to be a little bit too narrow as some of the pocket edges got trapped in the seam allowance, although I would probably make them longer in hindsight. Overall though, I was able to trim some of that away and the pockets turned out pretty nice. Once the prep work on all of my skirt gores was finished, it was finally time to sew them together. The actual construction of the skirt is really easy. You just put all the pieces together and gather the back piece until it fits your waist. Because my fabric was kind of bulky, my gathers did not end up fitting my waist exactly, but I was able to remedy that with a little bit of moving where the skirt closed and the interior waistband. The use of the bias binding on the seam allowances had already basically made a placket, so I didn't bother making a proper one. I used this strand of belting that I found at a big name craft store as my interior waistband, although in hindsight it's a little bit too narrow. I lapped it over the raw edges of the top of the skirt and then folded it over and put it into place, as the skirt waistband was a little bit too bulky at this point for it to stay in place with just ironing. I hemmed the skirt in a similar manner to how I had finished the seams. I attached a piece of bias binding to the end. I know that the bias binding I'm using here isn't the same color as the other bias binding, but I was too lazy to get in the car and drive just to get one package of bias tape. I then folded it up only a small amount because I had sacrificed some of the length to cut out the pieces, and attached it to the lining with some hand sewing. Using some of the extra fabric I had, I made a little waistband and a belt, which considerably improved the appearance of the skirt's bulky waistband. Hooks and eyes were sewn on, decorative buttons were attached to the belt and to one side of the pockets, and the skirt was basically done. I was originally going to put on a little bit more of a historically accurate blouse, but I think that this is kind of a look. I am very pleased with this skirt. It has some problems. The pockets are a little bit small, as I mentioned, and it is kind of bulky and heavy, but I think the fact that it has a pretty rigid structure from the flat lining kind of hides the bulk that's in some of the seams. The skirt is also very, very warm, and I'm looking forward to wearing this when it gets a little bit colder here. I think the shape that the pattern gives is really, really nice. I think it fits me really well, and I can't wait to see what the skirt will look like when I make it out of a little bit of a lighter fabric. Despite some of the problems that the thickness of the fabric gave me, I really enjoyed making this skirt, and I'm pretty proud of the end product. The skirt pattern itself was super easy to draft and put together, so I will definitely be making more skirts with it, just maybe with thinner fabric. Thank you so much for watching, and please come back soon if you'd like to see what Bernice is wearing right here.